Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Anne Marie Houlihan with Q4 Launch. Ready to get started on today's webinar. Just want to do a quick sound check. If someone can write to me and let me know that you can hear me okay. Wonderful, terrific. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, well, today's webinar is 5 best ways to prepare for a disaster and how to start now. This is new content for us, something that we just feel like was become really relevant in this past calendar year with so much of the United States being affected by disaster. And we think that there's a way to prepare, especially from a digital marketing standpoint, so that you can be as effective and efficient as possible while you're going through a terrible time. Okay, so just real quickly for anybody who's new to our educational series, I want to say welcome and thank you for participating. Over 8,000 people have engaged with us over the years. And when I say years, I mean 10. This is our 10th year in business for Q4 Launch. We're really proud of that. We have been honored to have been listed on the Inc. 5000 list for one of the fastest growing small businesses. And as it relates to advertising and marketing for the travel space, we were #1 in that list. Our offices are in Charleston, South Carolina, and we have a staff of about 40 employees. So just wanted you to know a little bit about us as we chat today. So as I mentioned, natural disasters can come in many forms and often with little to no warning. I don't need to remind any of you guys about the volcano eruptions and all the hurricane damages, the fires on the West Coast, and the tornadoes that run through the center of our country. They're devastating when they come, and it's a big issue for anybody who's running a small business. So when disaster strikes, and even when it doesn't, you're going to find yourself answering the same questions over and over again. Have you experienced damages? If you have, how much? Are you open? Will you reopen? What's your cancellation policy? And can I get a refund? And quite frankly, you might have policies that are in place for every day, but might not really apply during times of disaster. And the other thing to be aware of, some of these questions are going to be coming from people whose reservation isn't for another 9 months. My husband and I are sailors, and we have this saying that if something goes wrong, it goes wrong really fast. And I'd say that applies here. And so really the focus of today is to be as prepared as you can be in advance, without overdoing it. And specifically, I like for people to have a sense of, how their time is being spent. I view this webinar as being really great for somebody who's an aspiring or new to the industry and hasn't thought through these things. I also view it as helpful for someone who's experienced, folks who have thought about this, but they'll probably still learn something new. And then the third category is you're experienced, you're thorough, you've thought through a lot of it, but now this will be validation that you really are prepared and that you have kind of dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. So I'll share a personal story with you. My husband and I had a vacation rental planned for February of this year in St. Martin. Look at this place, how beautiful it is. Super exciting. And lest you think that I get paid tons and tons of dollars, I don't. As I mentioned, we're sailors, and we were going down to St. Martin for the Heineken Regatta, and we had 20 people staying in this house. So anyway, it was perfect for our needs, and we were really excited to go. And this is what it looked like. We put down our deposit on August 28th of 2017. Irma came along and hit on September 6th. You can imagine I'm like, my money, how do I get it? I mean, even more about whether we could go. Could I get my deposit back? And yet I tried to be really sensitive to these people who were going through disaster. I can tell you in our personal instance, they proactively reached out to us and said, if you'd like a refund, we'll do that. You know, we've been damaged and we can't accommodate your reservation. So now this is the website message for that property. So I'll just quickly go through that. Due to Hurricane Irma, we're unavailable for rental reservations until we complete renovation. We anticipate that won't start until July 1st. Please follow our progress on Facebook page for updates. We'll blog about it there periodically. So this is a great way, if you start to think about it and you start to imagine when you're going through an actual disaster and your phone is ringing off the hook, how many people could you have satisfied with a message like this? So, you know, when you think about it, if your hotel or your inn or your vacation rental is flooding and you think you need to spend your time sandbagging, bailing water, unplugging electric devices, and moving furniture to a higher floor, and also you could have guests on site and catering to the needs of those guests. That's how you think you might be spending your time. But the reality is you're going to be spending your time on phone and on email. You should be monitoring social media, and, you know, handling questions from guests and staff. And so let's unpack that a little bit. I talked to a woman, she had an inn in St. John that this past year hit by the hurricane. A tree knocked down in front of her house. She had to park her car on the other side of the downed tree, walk a mile every day to get into her car to try and go to her job. So your own staff is going to be impacted by this, obviously. Your suppliers for food and anything along those lines, medical support, pharmacy, things like that people are used to being able to have access to. Even if you decide your scenario is one where you can stay, you know, all your resources are going to be affected in some way, and the resources for your guests as well. So our recommendation is don't wait for a disaster to strike in order to have a plan. There's a lot that you can be doing in advance. So one of the things that we're going to go into first is to determine in advance your best resources for current information, and just remind yourself that it's not always 911. Now, a lot of you guys who have been in the industry for a while, this is going to maybe be a no-brainer to you, but maybe not. Maybe there'll be something you hadn't thought of before. So the first thing you need to know is your city and your county, which may sound strange, but it matters. So just a couple examples. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, but that's in Cook County. Here at Q4 Launch, our offices are in Mount Pleasant. But that's in Charleston County. So you want to know your city and county so that you go to the right places for your information. And typically, if you go to Charleston County Emergency Management, you will in a Google search, you'll probably find the information you need. So you want to bookmark that page of all those places where you need to be finding the information, because they're going to start to tell you where your resources are, who you should call when. I mean, look at all this. There's emergencies, rescue squad, fire department, speaker requests, training, alert system, all kinds of information that's on these things. So you want to spend a little bit of time with that, and don't be having to do that research while there's a fire beckoning at the door. And I would also recommend that you follow them on your social media, because as we're going to get to a little bit later on, you're going to be getting wanting to communicate stuff through social media, and it'll be so much easier for you if you can just go ahead and share what they've created. And then also understand the levels of emergency management. Sometimes they're named, they're numbered, or they're colored. So for us here in Charleston, there's normal operations, there's a possible threat, there's a significant threat, evacuation is imminent, or we're in the middle of evacuation. And you want to look and see what the scenarios are for you. To get into the real details of this is you want to decide what's your response going to be for each level of emergency. So as we look at it here, if I go back a page, if an evacuation is imminent, does that mean you're going to go? Does that mean you're going to ask your guests to go? Or does that mean, you know, it's maybe? When evacuation is imminent, then obviously everybody's leaving. But during these OPCON 2, 3, and 4, there could be a lot of questions, and you kind of want to think through this. So I can give you just a personal example, and this isn't related to the industry, but hurricanes are prominent here in Charleston, South Carolina, and my husband and I have decided that because of pets and family members who can't move around so easily, if it's a category 2 or less, we'll stay. If it's a category 3 or more, we'll go. And we have plans. We have ideas of where we would go, when we would leave, things like that, just in relation to if a hurricane comes here. An example I think about oftentimes, if anybody goes back to reading that book Into Thin Air about the climbers on Mount Everest, the policy there is no matter how close you are to the peak, if at 2 o'clock you turn around and you go down. If you're 5 steps away, doesn't matter. You turn around and go down because you've got thin air and weather conditions start to come in, and everybody knows that's the best practice. So kind of think for yourself along those lines, because maybe you're not going to be in a situation where you have thin air, but you're definitely going to have a lot going on, and you're not going to want to have to make a lot of decisions. There's things that you can do and decide for yourself when you're of sound mind and body, rather than when a disaster is taking place. So what instances will you stay in? What instances will you evacuate? What's your expectation of staff for each level of emergency? What's the bare minimum of staff required? How will you handle guests for each level of emergency? That example that I gave you in St. John, this was a vacation rental. Some of their guests on site refused to leave. I mean, who plans for that? That really surprised me, I have to tell you. And I will tell you what they did was they gave them a case of water and sheets and towels and said, best of luck to you because we're evacuating. And I don't know if that was the right decision, and I don't know what kind of issues could have played out for them, but clearly they were trying to make a decision in the moment. If you decide to stay, think about the local businesses that you rely on. What if they evacuate? Like, you can't think about this in a vacuum. You have to presume, okay, if I decide I can stay, but none of the support resources that I use locally are staying, can I still make this work? And then document and clearly communicate this plan with your staff. So what I recommend is that you use your resources to plan for these disasters. They talk about on those emergency management sites of, what an emergency kit consists of, what kinds of things you should have on hand, things along those lines. Go ahead and, be aware of what those recommendations are. So I can tell you we're uniquely qualified to give this webinar because in Charleston, we can experience nearly every type of natural disaster except for a volcano eruption. Charleston has experienced hurricane, multiple, tornado, earthquake, and it floods whenever there's a full moon at high tide. So believe me, in some ways, I feel like we're all living a readiness plan here in Charleston, South Carolina, but it is something that everybody has to think about. So develop a plan for each possibility. And then as you start to approach the seasons, like right now, hurricane season is starting, start to have your emergency kit prepared. We know when, tornadoes start to come. Harder to anticipate for earthquake and sometimes for volcano, but there are seasons for some of these emergencies. Fire season, absolutely. So go ahead and think about those things and be prepared so that you're not having to run and do it at the last minute. This is where we're going to get into the nitty gritty about the digital marketing. So what are your scenarios? And to me, it doesn't matter what your emergency is. The scenarios are my property is impacted and will be closed. I would say my property and my destination are impacted and will be closed. My destination's impacted, but we're going to remain open. And then the disaster was not near us. We are open. Our destination is as beautiful as ever. I can tell you this year I've spoken to a lot of people over the year about, how is their revenue? How is their business going? And a few people have come to us and said, ours was down this year, but we really think it was because people thought we were affected by the Bryan fires. They didn't realize that, that hurricane that hit in our state wasn't anywhere near us. And all of a sudden, either people canceled or people didn't think to come to us for their short-term plans. So it's really important to communicate even when the disaster is not near you. maybe even more important. I got a question about what an emergency looks like for wildfires, and for that, I will refer to the local resources. I'm sure that they will tell you it must be something along the lines of burn kits, a way to have a lot of water, like drinking water, and something to wet towels. I'm not sure, but I would go ahead and ask, refer to those local resources. So here we come to communication. So during times of crisis, it's important to have really clear and concise language. And as you can imagine, I'm actually going to jump to my bottom bullet. If you prepare this in advance when you're of sound mind and body, it's easy to be level-headed, and you can choose good language. It's a lot harder when you're afraid for yourself and afraid for your guests and your pets and your property. But also go ahead and use that language that's provided by local government. These guys are always preparing for extreme scenarios, and they are very conscious about the language that they use. And so don't recreate the wheel. Go ahead and look at what they have and go ahead and copy that. Then you know you're pretty safe, because greater minds have been thinking about this probably longer than any of us. You want to think through your policies and how they might change in light of a natural disaster. So yes, you probably always want 14 days notice, maybe for some of you 30 days notice for a cancellation. But honestly, are you going to enforce that during a hurricane? In the instance of a refund, look for ways to honor the reservation at another time, or maybe a gift certificate may be appropriate. See if there isn't a way that you can still keep that relationship and still get that revenue, obviously in the most appropriate way. What if your guests aren't affected by a natural disaster? What if you aren't, but one of your guests is? So I spoke to a person with vacation rentals in Colorado one time, and it was after Hurricane Irma, and she said, I contacted everybody from Puerto Rico, and I said, if you want a reservation refund, you can have it. That she understood that they were going through a really terrible time and probably weren't in a good place to take a vacation right now. So these are all things to think about as well. Are you in a position where you can give some grace to somebody who's going through a terrible time, even though they're not in your area? And one of the things to talk about, and I go into this a little bit later, is you're not going to post a policy that's for a natural disaster and leave that on your website all the time. But you probably do want to think about what your policy would be under unique situations and have it written so that you can go ahead and post that when needed. And just think about it. I think that if you give yourself a little bit of time, you'll think about realistically, am I really going to insist on that refund? Or yeah, I am, because my property just got devastated, and that's why I have this policy. It doesn't really matter what your answer is. It matters that you think through it in light of an extreme situation. So now that you've identified your scenarios, you want to write copy for each of them. And what you might be like, well, what copy? Like, think about what's that alert on your website going to say? And you can have like highlighted sections where you drop in dates and drop in, the really specific details. But the bulk of the message is, we've been affected. We're closed. We don't anticipate taking reservations until this date. Come here for more. Go to this place for more information. That's going to be a good thing to have as an alert on your website. If there's any way on the referral sites that you can have that message living there, anything along those lines. Social media posts, you can start to think through and have a shell of a message of what you want to say on there. Maybe saying it in different ways so that they're pre-written, like on the day, the days leading up to something, if you have advance notice, on the day of, on the days after, you can start to think through, we're anticipating a storm. This is our plan of action. The storm has hit. This is how we've been affected. The storm has passed. We're back open again. All we had was a couple of plants get killed outside. And the storm has passed entirely. You can come back and enjoy our area. Think about what those things that you'd like to say. Same thing with email communication. You want to put something out to everybody who knows you that this is happening and what your set of scenarios is, so that they can not have to call you, really. It's really important to have talking points for your staff and whoever's answering the phones, so that everybody's singing from the same songbook. You don't want when you're the owner or you're the one in charge, they're all going to turn and look to you. If there's any way that you can think through this and have a plan in place that you just put in everyone's hands, then they've got their own resources with which to operate. And as I mentioned before, I would consider updating your policy page, maybe put on there, dated for this time period. In light of this disaster, this is our policy now. Anybody who can be resourceful via online will be, and it's one less set of questions that you have to answer. And more importantly, if they get it from that source, you know for sure that they got exactly what you wanted to hear, because if you do have staff answering phones, there still is a possibility that something can get passed along slightly incorrectly. If they're reading it on a policy page, then there's no question about it. Then what you should do is create your assets for scenario A, B, and C in advance. So build out that email. Like, you don't have to be, could you just imagine there's water coming in and you're sitting there on your laptop, on the one plug that's still dry, and trying to build out an email and trying to create an alert. Like, maybe you don't even know how to do that on your website. Like, don't be doing that stuff in the time when it's really tough time. So build out your email and save it. And again, use some kind of highlighted text so that you know where you have to drop in specific dates and details. Create the alerts on your websites and just save them as a draft. And all you have to do is publish it when it comes time. Same thing with your social media posts. Think about images. So again, you know what kind of natural disasters can come your way. We know here that hurricanes. So go ahead and pull down a picture of something related to hurricane, so there's a visual cue that goes with the post, and people know when they're searching for information that that's what this is about. This is going to sound weird, but you may want to have a special in your back pocket for one of your scenarios. I can give you an example. So for the fires out in California, much of wine country was affected, but not all of wine country was affected. If somebody's got their airfare done and they fly to an airport and they have to drive to wherever they were going to go, maybe they don't want to sacrifice their airfare. They know they can't go to their original accommodations. Maybe they can go someplace else, and maybe you've got a special ready for those people whose plans just changed. I don't want it to sound super opportunistic or getting pleasure from someone else's pain, but it's not really that. It's being helpful to somebody whose plans just changed without warning, and now they can still salvage, an important trip that they either have to still make because it's business, or one that their family's been looking forward to. So go ahead and build that special in your PMS system or in your booking engine and save that as a draft, and then also a page on your website and save that as a draft. Then decide who does what. So if you are fortunate enough to have a marketing services agency like us at Q4 Launch, you can and should rely on us for your digital communication. And I want to go into this with a little bit of detail. Thus far, we have been doing this kind of ad hoc. We know our customers. We know if we've got a customer in Durango and there's fires nearby, we're reaching out to them. We're making posts for them, doing whatever it is that they've asked. It is on the responsibility of the customer, though, to think through their own plan, think through what they want, but they can have scenarios A, B, and C set, and you can give them to us, and you can give us a copy for your emails and say, just keep this on file. And if something happens, you pick up the phone, you call your marketing agency and say, it's plan B. And we know what that is, and we go ahead and do it. So I want to be really clear here, because I know we have a lot of customers on the line. Like I said, we've been doing this kind of in an ad hoc kind of way, and handling it, sending out emails, putting out alerts, managing social media on behalf of our customers. But it did come down to us calling, or them calling us saying, here's what we need, here's what I need you to say and do. So the invitation that I have for you is to think through this on your own. And then if you're a customer of ours, go ahead and get in touch with your customer experience manager and say, these are my 3 scenarios. Here's the copy for all this. Like, we can build an email on the site because we're not in the middle of a disaster. So all we really need is the copy, maybe some direction on what kind of image you'd like to use. But think through those scenarios and go ahead and communicate that. We can keep that on file. And then when the time comes, all you have to do is make one text message, one phone call that says, scenario B, move forth. And we can go ahead and do that. Some of you who are in the vacation rental space, you might have call centers. So think through how you might engage them to help you with answering phones so that you can be catering to your guests on site. You can be moving the furniture, addressing whatever you have to preserve your property. And if you don't have any of those things, is there somebody in your world, a cousin in Des Moines, someplace that's landlocked that you can say, hey, I need you to help me. I'm going to make you an admin. Will you please just watch my social media? Here's what we need to be saying. Anything along those lines. So just try and figure out some way that you've got somebody who's not in the eye of the storm, and who can be doing some of the stuff, because it doesn't all have to be done on site. Some of it can be delegated off site. Here are some things you absolutely must do during a natural disaster. And this one may surprise you, but keep a log of all phone calls and emails. That means every staff person who's monitoring a phone, there's a notebook either by every phone or however it is, but every time somebody gets on the phone with somebody, you write down their name and you write down their phone number. You keep some kind of track of the emails that you've sent, because you won't remember every person with whom you've spoken to. And you'll have no way of knowing if your staff already has. So here's what I worry about is you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, and now you're bailing water, and all of a sudden it pops into your head, oh my gosh, these people are supposed to come here in 9 days. Have we gotten in touch with them? I mean, you don't have time to be doing all this in the first place. You really don't have time to be calling people twice. So if you've got that log and you start to think through, did I get everybody? Or maybe you compare that log to what's in your booking engine and make some sense of it all when you have a minute to breathe and make sure you've reached out to everybody you need to. You can be efficient and you can be organized and you can be, proactive, but not if you don't have that information. Like I said, you need to be monitoring your social media because people will be posting comments and questions, and somebody needs to be responding to those as well. Even though you've got all this stuff up there, let's all remember, even while you're going through a tough scenario, so are these people who have planned a vacation and set aside money and have, no refunds on airfare to come on their vacation. So they're kind of anxious as well, and they're not necessarily going to be level-headed and reading everything clearly. So even though the information's there, somebody's still going to call. If you need to close or evacuate, think through who you might refer your impacted guests to. So I was talking about that with Wine Country. So yes, we do compete for business. Yes, we want the bookings. But at the end of the day, we are a community, and natural disaster can hit anybody. So this example that I knew of in California Wine Country, one innkeeper had to close, and they contacted all their people with upcoming reservations, and they contacted, somebody else in an unaffected area of Wine Country, an innkeeper that they really respected, and said, do you have openings? Can you take guests? Figured out who she could parcel people off to, and then invited them to go and make that switch so that the vacation was salvaged, and those people still had somewhere to go if they chose to. And ideally you do that and somebody will pay it forward. If disaster comes their way, they might go ahead and do the same thing, send people your way. Or even if somebody calls and they're booked, but they have that good relationship with you. This could be a silver lining here, where we behave as a community, we throw business each other's way, and we constantly think about the guest. The other thing you might not have thought of, and again, especially if you have an agency and you think to yourself, I already told them plan B or whatever, you need to suspend all promotional communication. So anything that's been scheduled, I don't know that autoresponders need to be turned off, but maybe you just want to take a look at all of that and know, is it appropriate that this email go out to a huge database in light of the situation at hand? Chances are the answer is no. Chances are the only communication that should be going out should be relevant to the disaster. I also invite you to be part of the solution. So maybe your property isn't affected, but the destination is. Maybe you can give free accommodation to firefighters or to anybody who is on the ground, boots on the ground, trying to help deal with this disaster. If your guests can't get to you because it's evacuation and the roads are closed and nobody will let them through anyway, you might as well go ahead and let these people who are working hard to save your destination have a comfortable place to stay and reduce their commute time going back and forth to addressing either hurricane recovery or fire damage. If you have an inventory of food that you can't use or save, go ahead and serve it to the volunteers who are working during the emergency. I think that that's a really great way to not be wasteful and to be part of the solution. And there are times when somebody might capture that for PR, and that might be good for you. That shouldn't be your real reason for doing it, but sometimes there's happy accidents that somebody catches that picture of you guys go ahead and serving a beautiful breakfast to a bunch of soot-faced fireworkers who are giving their all to try and save your area. And then obviously when the worst of the damage is behind you, how are you working with local tourism to find ways to attract visitors to your region again? I'll go back to that example of that woman who said, you know, they thought that the fires were so bad that it not only impacted their immediate time, but it impacted them for months to come because people just didn't know that the destination had recovered, that it was fine. You could go back and still enjoy much of everything you would have liked to have done on this trip. So how does your destination in totality and Chamber of Commerce and people in tourism work together to get the word out that we're open and ready for business? So one of the things that I wanted to offer you, and this is a little unusual, typically we offer a Google Analytics analysis or we offer a marketing grader or website grader. Here, what I'd be willing to do is just take a look at what you create for your scenarios and make, you know, another set of eyes on them, make sure that you're thinking everything through and that they're complete and that you've used all the resources that are available to you. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to go ahead and put a poll up and you can just say yes. And then I'll be in touch with you. And in the meantime, I invite you, if you have any questions, to go ahead and use the chat panel right now and send me your questions. So the poll's open. Hopefully you're starting to see that. And I'm getting some responses. Thank you, thank you. And I can multitask. So while that's going, if anybody's got questions, go ahead and let me know. Anything that you feel like I haven't covered or if there's, you know, something to share. We've got about 27% voted. It doesn't let me close until we get about 70%. So please go ahead and vote. And then I can close this down. For those of you who have voted, I'm just curious because this was pretty kind of different content. Any feedback on how you liked a session like this, or did anything about this information, was it something surprising that you think you'll be able to put into use? Well, thank you. I'm glad we got some people responding back. Okay, I can go ahead and close this now. Okay, so that's really my presentation. I welcome any questions that you guys might have. I can stick around for a few more minutes. And just go ahead and send them my way. Otherwise, we can wrap it up for today. And as always, we do record our webinars, and I'll be sending this out to everyone who registered. Oh, that's nice. I got a lot of thanks for the helpful information. Oh, somebody wrote that they look forward to the recording because they want to write more notes. That's nice. Okay, I don't see many more questions, but my email address and my phone number is right there. If you think you've got a question, you just couldn't really formulate it, go ahead and jot down my email and phone and just reach out to me. And those of you who requested the scenario analysis, I'll be getting in touch with you. Thanks so much, and really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. Take care, everybody.